Welcome to Scarface Quotes. Today, guess who we'll talk about? The legend himself, who was the inspiration for the 1932 Scarface film, which then led to the iconic 1983 remake with Al Pacino. Al Capone, the most notorious criminal in American history, was born in 1899 to immigrant parents in Brooklyn, New York. Capone's multi-million-dollar Chicago bootlegging, prostitution, and gambling enterprise dominated the organized criminal landscape in 1920, at the height of Prohibition. Many horrific acts of violence, mostly against fellow criminals, were committed by Capone. Al Capone was essentially the real Scarface. Let's talk about his story, but before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow us on all our social media platform links, provided in the description box. Gabriel and Teresina Capone, recent immigrants from Italy, were the parents of Al Capone. The Capones had 8 children. They led a typical immigrant existence in a New York tenement as an impoverished family who came from America in search of a better life. His mother was a seamstress, while his father was a barber. Nothing about Capone's upbringing or family circumstances could have foreseen his climb to notoriety as the most infamous criminal in American history. Capone had potential as a student, but struggled to follow the straight regulations of his Catholic school. At the age of 14, he was expelled from school for striking a female instructor in the face, which put an end to his education. Al Capone dropped out of school just after 6th grade and joined an infamous street gang, where he was welcomed as a member. The street gang boss was Johnny Torrio and Lucky Luciano, who would later become well-known. When Capone started doing little errands for Torrio, he was operating numbers and a gambling business close to his house. The two stayed close even after Torrio moved from Brooklyn to Chicago in 1909. Early on, Capone kept to lawful jobs like working as a paper cutter and in a munition factory. He did spend time with Brooklyn street gangs, but other than a few minor altercations, his gang involvement was very quiet. Frankie Galluccio, a gangster who hired Capone as a bartender and bouncer at Harvard Inn on Coney Island in 1917, was introduced to Capone by Torrio. In that place, Capone picked up the title Scarface. Al Capone told Frankie's sister, "Honey, you got a beautiful ass." And her brother Frankie pulled a knife and slashed the left side of his face. And there grew the infamous gangster nickname of Scarface. After the 18th Amendment, which prohibited the use of alcoholic drinks, was approved in 1920.
Yes, closed by the 18th Amendment.
Torrio shifted his focus to a new, more lucrative industry, bootlegging. Torrio controlled a thriving gambling and prostitute industry in Chicago. The illegal manufacture, distilling, and marketing of beer and alcoholic beverages that the Prohibition Amendment spawned were seen as growth industries. Capone, a formal small-time criminal and bookkeeper, contributed his street smarts and financial know-how to Torrio's Chicago operations. In Al Capone's words, "Prohibition has made nothing but trouble." He also said, "Some call it bootlegging. Some call it racketeering. I call it business." Torrio swiftly elevated Capone to partner after recognizing his abilities. The Mafia also built holdings in respectable cleaning and dyeing companies and developed relationships with accommodating government officials, labor unions, and employee associations. But unlike the low-key Torrio, Capone started to gain a reputation for being a drinker and troublemaker. He was detained for the offense of driving while intoxicated after striking a parked taxicab. Torrio soon utilized his bonding with the city leadership to exonerate him. Al was flamboyant and was a sharp dresser. He had immense love for excessive jewelry. He also had a custom bulletproof automobile, and we can see how Capone was used as inspiration in the 1932 film, where Tony Camonte is a very sharp dresser, and he too had a custom bulletproof vehicle as well. Capone described himself as the modern-day Robin Hood. When asked what Capone did for a living, he stated, "I am just like any other businessman. All I do is supply a demand," which is one of Al's most iconic quotes to date. Capone was married at the age of 19 to his wife named May Coughlin. Albert Francis, the couple's son, was born only a few weeks after the wedding. The boy's godfather was Johnny Torrio, a friend and ex-boss of Capone. Capone, who was now married and a father, traveled to Baltimore and took a decent job as an accountant for a construction business because he wanted to do the right thing for his family. Torrio, however, asked Capone to visit Chicago after the death of Capone's father from a heart attack in 1920. Capone seized the chance with both hands. When his family from Brooklyn arrived, Capone improved his behavior. His mother, younger brothers, sisters, and wife all relocated to Chicago, and Capone purchased a modest home in the South Side's middle class. He once mentioned, "Capitalism is the legitimate racket of the ruling class." In 1924, Joe Howard was killed by Capone as retaliation for Howard's prior assault on one of Capone's friends. When the witness to the murder, fearing harm, lost their composure and denied recalling the occurrence, William McSwiggan, an aggressive prosecutor, tried very hard to accuse Capone, but he failed. Later on that year, Torrio and Capone hired Yale and other friends to kill ganghead Dion O'Banion in his flower store. Early in 1925, O'Banion's friends, Charles Moran and Jaime Weiss, made a failed effort to murder Torrio. After Big Jim Colosimo was violently killed, Torrio quickly assumed full control of the gang, and Capone developed into his dependable right arm. In 1925, when Torrio gave up leadership and retired to Brooklyn after being injured in an assassination attempt, Capone took control of the gang. In the brutal gang wars of the time, where he battled for control of several Chicago neighborhoods known as racketeering rights, Capone eventually developed a frightening image. As other gangs were dismantled or rendered ineffective, Cicero becomes now for its status as the Capone mob's stronghold. Al said, "I have made my organization upon fear." Two of Capone's fervent foes were spotted in Cicero in 1926, and Capone gave the order for his men to shoot them. William McSwiggan, also known as the hanging prosecutor, who had attempted to charge Al Capone with a prior murder, was with the two men who were targeted, and the three of them were killed without Capone's knowledge. The public cried out for justice, fed up with the gang-dominated lawlessness in Chicago. The police were unable to find any proof of the murders, so they instead raided Capone's enterprises and collected material that would ultimately be used to support income tax evasion claims against him. A decision was made to end the violence after Capone requested a peace conference among the city's gangsters. It only lasted 2 months. By the beginning of 1929, Capone controlled Chicago's black market for alcohol, but other criminals fought for a slice of the lucrative bootlegging market, and Moran, who was also known as Bugs, was Capone's longtime foe. After attempting to kill both Torrio and Capone, Moran went seeking Capone's hitman, Jack McGunn, shortly named Machine Gun. Moran's murder was decided upon by Capone and McGunn. McGunn's assassins killed 7 of Moran's men in cold blood in a North Side garage on February 14, 1929, while posing as police. Bugs avoided the carnage because he became aware of the threat as he got closer to the garage. The public and the media immediately held Capone responsible for the slaughter, despite the fact that he was actually residing at his Miami mansion at the time. In his words, "We've been on the road for 18 hours. I need a bath, some chow, and then you and me sit down and talk about who dies, huh?" President Herbert Hoover urged the federal government to intensify its attempts to catch Capone on income tax evasion in reaction to the public outcry over the St. Valentine's Day massacre. The government had a solid case for prosecuting Capone since the Supreme Court had decided in 1927 that money earned via unlawful activity was taxable. Finally, Capone was charged with 22 counts of income tax dodging by the U.S. government on June 5, 1931. Capone struck a plea agreement in exchange for a 2.5-year sentence, even though the government had strong evidence against him. Capone remained convinced that he would receive a light term. Capone promptly withdrew his guilty plea, and the matter went to trial. Capone employed his 2 most effective tactics: bribery and intimidation. But the judge suddenly chose a completely different jury, and Capone received an 11-year prison sentence after being proven guilty. He was admitted to the Atlanta Penitentiary in May 1932, but in August 1934, he was moved to the brand new Alcatraz prison. He was discharged and checked into a Baltimore hospital in November 1939, while experiencing the overall decline of paresis, a late stage of syphilis. Later, the helpless recluse retired to his Florida home, where he passed away from a heart attack in 1947. A New York Times headline titled Capone's death as "End of an Evil Dream" The public and the media constantly alternated between loving and hating Al Capone. The massive image of Capone captivated a lot of Americans. That's all for today. How many of you knew that Al Capone was the original Scarface? Also, if you have interesting information about Al Capone, share with us in the comments section. See you in the next episodes. Till then, goodbye and take care.